Hello, 5B. Mrs. K here, and I have some special guests that are going to help me today do reading class with you. So, Natalie, you say good morning.
Good morning.
And what do they need to get out?
Get your Batboy book out and your reading folder.
And what chapters are we going to read today? 17 through 20. Okay, so we're going to read 17 through 20. It might get kind of boring if you just keep hearing me read. If you want to, feel free to mute me, and you can just follow along inside your book. But before we do that, we do need to do vocab. So we are on chapter 17. So get out your vocab folder, and we're going to do some vocab. We're going to do 17 through 20, so I don't think it's going to be that many. So here we go. I am not going to pause, so or I'm not going to go slow. So if you need to pause, go ahead and just pause the movie. So here's the first one. Palate. The roof of the mouth, consisting of an anterior bony portion and a posterior muscular portion. Incurable. Not curable, that cannot be cured, remedied, or corrected. Persistence. The act or fact of persisting. Steeled, to render insensible, inflexible, unyielding, determined, etc. Coincidence. A striking occurrence of two or more events at one time, apparently by mere chance. And that is a cat and a bunny that look just alike. See it? Discombobulated. To confuse or discontent, upset, and frustrate. And that is a goat who is so confused. So funny story with goats. We have a dog named Jackson, and we call him a goat because he just acts like a goat. So whenever we see a goat, we say that there's Jackson's uncle. All right, almost done. A pension. A fixed amount other than wages paid at regular intervals to a person or to the person's surviving dependents in consideration of past service, age, merit, poverty, injury, or loss sustained, etc. Brina, you be quiet. Reminiscing. To recall past experiences, events, etc. Indulge in reminiscence. Chapter 20, none. So not too bad, right? Yeah? Okay. Natalie is going to hold the book for me, or I'm sorry, my phone, so she can just video me recording. I don't know if you actually even need to hold it. Maybe I can just prop it up here. We'll prop it up. There we go. All right, chapter 17, page 133. If you have your worksheet that I gave to you on Tuesday in class, you can go ahead and do the questions while I'm reading. We're going to start with number 1, and we can do this whole front page, so between 1 through 8, and I will try and stop and kind of discuss by myself. If you have any questions, though, you need to come live at 10 o'clock with me, and we will, or is it 10:30, something like that, and we will go over the questions together. All right, chapter 17. It wasn't just Hank who wasn't the hitter he used to be. Brian had completely lost his stroke for the Bloomfield Sting. Forget warning track power. He had no power now, and he couldn't buy himself a base hit. The harder he tried, the more clueless he felt. Kenny had a theory about it, but then Kenny Griffin had theories about everything from whether or not space aliens actually existed to palate expanders and how they'd just been invented by a kid-hating orthodontist for their own sick, twisted amusement. You know whose fault your slump is, he said. The Tigers. The Tigers? Kenny nodded. The way teachers did when they led you to the right answer. Yep, you spend so much time with them and so little time with us, you're picking up bad habits, despite the fact that you spend most of your days and nights watching guys with excellent habits. You know what my bad habit is, Brian said? Striking out. It's just a slump. more like an incurable disease, terminal scrubness. They were back at West Hills, getting ready to play the third game of 3 against the other team from Rochester, the Bulldogs. The two teams had split the first two. Brian had struck out 3 times in Friday night's loss and 3 more times yesterday, a game Kenny had saved with a 2-out, 2-run single in the bottom of the ninth. I got one more theory, Kenny said. You always do. I think maybe you're a little burned out. Burned out, Brian said, nodding like he was agreeing. At 14, good call. Burned out. Why didn't I think of that? Go ahead and go full snark on me, Kenny said, but check it out. Maybe even you can't eat, sleep, and drink baseball every single hour of every single day of your whole life. So this isn't the Tigers' fault, Brian said. It's baseball's fault? Now you're talking. And you're a freak, Brian said. This isn't baseball's fault. It's my fault. I couldn't hit a meatball right now with a fork. Meatball with a fork? Dude, I gotta admit, that's the first time I've ever heard that one. It's one of Davy Sheffield's. He's got a lot of them. One time, he referred to a play as being the straw that broke the coffin's back. Kenny laughed, which didn't take much. Sometimes, Brian wondered if he was ever sad about anything besides giving up a run. You know when you're snapping out of the junk, Kenny said, today. But Kenny was wrong. The Sting might have won the game, but Brian was hitless, striking out 3 times in 4 at-bats. The more he pressed, the worse it got. The more he guessed on which pitch was coming, the dumber he looked. He was either off stride or getting his hands through or pulling his head off the ball on every pitch. The only thing he was consistently hitting right now was air. When it was over, even though the Sting had won in a beatdown, his mom consoled him, or at least tried to, as if they'd lost the game. Tough day, pal, you think? You'll get him next time, she said. They were walking toward the parking lot. Brian knew she was just trying to be a mom, even if she didn't know the right thing to say. Brian stopped. Please don't, he said. Don't what? Don't act like you know that things will get better, he said. Kenny tried that earlier, because you don't know. I'm lucky to even be on this team, and now I'm the one doing the most to let it down. Sorry for trying, she said, but then I was never much good at pep talks, even if I do know a thing or two about persistence. Mom, he said, let's not do this today. I wasn't aware we were doing anything. It didn't matter what the subject was these days, Hank, Bishop, or anything else. All these conversations were starting to feel the same, sound the same. He stood there between the field and the parking lot, trying to remember the last time talking to his mom felt easy. It was as hard as trying to remember the last time hitting a baseball felt easy. I'm sorry. One is me, he said, and started walking again toward the car. Maybe if I can't be a real member of the team, then I shouldn't be on anymore. I don't know what to tell you, kiddo, his mom said. Finally, she was right about something. But I have one more thing to say, and I think you'll want to hear it. Brian steeled himself and faced her. Your father is coming to town. Okay, so number 1, it says in chapter 17, what was happening to the conversations occurring between Brian and his mom? Why were all they starting to feel and sound the same? So, he was talking about how it's not easy anymore to talk to his mom. So why do you think that is? What do you think she's feeling right now too with Brian? Remember, her husband left her, and she feels like baseball is kind of like her enemy. So, okay, chapter 18. Dad, Brian said, coming here? He arrives on Thursday. He's apparently in the States to do some scouting for a week or so. He said that originally he was supposed to stay on the West Coast, but now, isn't this a happy coincidence? They want him to take a look at Hank Bishop, with an eye toward maybe bringing him to Japan next season. Hank, Japan? No way. Even I know he's way too proud. Your father says that he's still a huge star over there, and they've signed guys like him at the end of their careers for a lot of money. So, are we going to see him? He wants to come here the day he arrives. He says he's going to the Tigers game that night, leaving the next morning. He's coming to a game, Brian said. Does he know about your job, she said. He does, as it turns out, because when I gave him the news, he informed me that you'd informed him in a letter. I tried shooting him an email, he said, but it bounced back. I figured Dad's still a computer savvy as ever. His mom said, it's not the contact info I'm interested in. I wasn't aware that there was any contact at all. Brian wasn't going to take any heat, have his brand attacked, as Kenny would say, for telling his dad he'd gotten a Batboy job, so he just tried to make a joke out of the whole thing. Technically, he said, if somebody doesn't respond, then how much contact did you really have? Now, she smiled for real. You got me there, she said. I'll give you more details on this breaking story as it comes in. He wasn't going to tell her this, but the only detail that mattered was that his dad was coming to town. Brian knew he'd take any kind of contact he could get with him, even if it was only for a day. Cole Dudley hadn't changed all that much, starting with the fact that he still seemed to think that a high five was the same as a hug, no matter how long it had been since he'd seen your son. Brian and his mom and dad were in the living room, and Brian was still trying to process the fact that the three of them were in any kind of room together. But they were until his mom, who acted as if she'd rather be anywhere else in the house except here, finally said, "Well, you two have some catching up to do, and I have to get ready for work." Before she left, Brian's father asked, "How's that going for you at the station, I mean?" "It's going," she said, and walked out. His dad's hair might have gotten a little more gray in it. He might have put on some weight. Brian wasn't sure, but he didn't really look any older than he had when he left. He had worn a blue blazer to the house, and when he took it off now, he draped it over the back of the couch. Brian saw that his golf shirt said Chiba Loda stitched on it. "It's great to see you, pal," he said. "You too." His dad was on the couch now, Brian in the chair facing him on the other side of the coffee table. He hadn't known where to sit and just grabbed the chair. "Listen," his dad said, "before we talk about anything else, I'm sorry." And that was as far as he got. What hadn't changed about his dad? It still looked to Brian as if he had the biggest hands in the world, hands that could make a baseball disappear as if he were doing some kind of magic trick with it. His dad stared down at his hands now, as if he'd rather have a ball in them, as if then he'd know what to do. "Dad, you don't have to." "No, I do. I'm sorry about the way I left. Sorry that I haven't called or written back or anything." Now he looked up. But getting out of here," he said. "It was like when it was time to get out of baseball. Pitching-wise, I mean. It was just time, is all. I didn't want to stay around and try to find the right words or answer the question I knew you wanted to ask. If it had been a game, I'd just been handed you the ball like I was taking myself out and kept walking." He smiled at Brian and then shrugged. "Anyway, I'm real glad to see you, as hard as that might be for you to believe." "Dad," Brian said, "you don't have to explain now. Really, you don't." He wondered in the moment that if he said the wrong thing, his dad might get up and leave again, before his one day with Dad had even started. His dad, still smiling, said, "Gee, I am so good at it." He nodded at the doorway. "Practice my talking skills with your mom's back." There was a quiet between them now, neither of them sure where to take this next. Brian thought, all the times when I wanted to be with him watching a game on TV or sitting next to him in section 135, and now here he is, and I don't know what to say to him. And he knew why. Knew how little they'd ever have to say to each other when they weren't talking baseball. "So, the Batboy deal," he said. "They being nice to you?" "Yeah." "You like it then, being around the game every day?" "A lot." "They know you're my son?" he asked, "even if you probably don't feel like that lately?" "Some of the guys do," Brian said. He grinned and said, "You know, the older ones." Ouch. Then it was quiet again. Brian could hear his mom moving around upstairs, the floorboards squeaking the way they had since they moved into this house, where they were still a family. "What about you?" Brian said. "How's the Japan deal working out?" "Well, they sure do love their baseball," he said, "so I'm good with that. Not so good on the food, of course, the raw fish and whatnot, so I feel like I spend a lot of my free time looking for a good burger." "You like coaching?" "Oh, I still have a lot to say on the subject, but now I've got to say it through a translator. Sorry. Though some of my old coaches would say I always needed one of those." "You were always good at talking baseball to me, Dad," Brian said. First time he called him that today. Dad. "Well, I can see you as a little different over there," his dad said, "because once I got past konnichiwa for hello and sayonara for goodbye, I pretty much got to use the old hands of mine." Brian could see him loosening up now, relaxing, settling into this, always more comfortable talking about himself, about baseball. "It's good, honest work, and better than anybody was offering me in the big leagues, and it helps that I'm working for an American." Bud Valley had managed the Twins and the Orioles in America, but had taken the job with Chiba Loda after the Orioles had fired him 2 years ago. "Bud must trust you if he's got you scouting now," Brian said. "Mom said you would want to take a look at Hank Bishop." "Your man," his dad said. "Oh, I don't think I've got a snowball's chance in Miami of even getting him to talk to us when the season's over. But they surely would pay him, because he's kind of a big American name they love over there." He grinned again and said, "Heck, you don't even have to be a big name. Some of them even remember your old man." He sighed. "But enough about me," he said. "You really doing okay, pal?" I'm still his pal, Brian thought, talking to me like I'm still 5. When he'd come home for a visit during the season, about this time of year, I'll come home for a good after the season, before he finds an excuse to get to Florida or Arizona early for spring training. Good, Brian said, really good. I really do love my job, and I was even pretty good. It was having a pretty good season for my team, the Sting, before I went into my horrendous slump. Man, his dad said, aren't those the pits? My swing feels all discombobulated, like I'm off balance all the time. His dad nodded, and Brian knew what he wanted to happen now. Wanted his dad to tell him they should go find the nearest field and take a look at it. His dad's cell phone went off. Still playing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. He pulled it out of his pocket, looked at the number, said, "Gotta take this, pal," and walked through the Terrence doors to the small outside patio. "Yeah, I'm in Detroit, on the way to the ballpark in a little while, then out of here for the first flight tomorrow." The conversation didn't last long. They never did with his dad. When he came inside, he said, "Hey, I was thinking we could get some time here before I drive you to commercial." "You're taking me?" Brian said. "I cleared it with the boss," he said, pointing upstairs. "Cool," Brian said. "Like the old days," his dad said, "just the two of us." "Maybe it was going to be a great day after all." "Yeah," Brian said, "like that." "Anyway," his dad said, checking his watch, "we still got a little time and I'm starving. How about we get some lunch?" "Sushi," Brian said. "Funny," Cole Dudley said. "I want to find a thick burger dripping so much blood, it's like I just shot it myself." "Is Hunter House still in business over there in Woodward?" "Sure is," Brian said. "Let's get out of here." He said, "Go get yourself a couple of big fat sliders." One thing really hadn't changed with his dad then. He still couldn't wait to get out of the house. Okay, back to the worksheet. You can do numbers 2 and 3. How did Brian feel about his dad coming into town? And why did Brian and his dad have so very little to talk about? So I don't think the conversation between him and his dad kind of went the way that he wanted to, or it was just what he expected it to be, not very personable. Okay, 2 more chapters.
I don't know what your question is.
Okay, chapter 19 is a little bit long, and then 20 is short, so bear with me. All right. His dad had called ahead to the Tigers, and they had given him a seat in the stands where some of the older scouts sat. Tonight, for the Tigers Blues Jay games, the seats were on the home team side of the park, but closer to home plate than the Tigers dugout in section 130. Not exactly the old seats, but close enough. Cole Dudley had the Tigers PR people that he was coming with Brian, so they left his ticket at the Montcalm entrance, along with a one-day media credential that would get him into the Tigers clubhouse and onto the field. His dad had said on his way to the ballpark that he wanted to say hello to Marty McBain, his own teammate, and Rube Morgan, the ancient, or so Brian thought, Tigers pitching coach. Brian had never really talked with Mr. Morgan, but it turned out that he had seen Cole Dudley's first pitching coach in the majors when he came up with the Dodgers. And his dad had mentioned that he pitched with Tom McKenzie when McKenzie was a phenomenon in Boston, and with Mike Pirelli for 2 months in Arizona once. He had never played with Hank Bishop, but Brian knew that Hank's lifetime stats were great against Cole Dudley. 20 career at-bats, 10 hits, 3 home runs, 8 RBI. I told him in Japan that if they were looking for references on Hank, they didn't have to go any further than me, his dad said. Everybody made a big fuss when his dad walked into the clubhouse. Bobby Moore, who played a year in Japan once, even bowed and said konnichiwa, and Brian's dad laughed and said, "I got your konnichiwa right here, dude." And just like that, that fast, Brian's dad was one of the boys again. Or maybe once you were one of the boys, once you were in the club, they always treated you that way. Maybe it was like the Robert Frost poem that they were studying in English, the one about home being the place when you went, they had to take you in. Davey Sheffield came out of his office to say hello, and Marty McBain lifted up Cole Dudley in a bear hug, saying that his old buddy sure hadn't missed many meals over there. Mike Pirelli told him to save a job for him. Tom McKenzie joked that after all his arm surgeries, now he knew what it was like to get by with a total junk the way Brian's dad had his whole career. Junk and brains, his dad said. Tom said, "If it was brains, you wouldn't have lasted long enough to earn your pension." They all laughed again. The only one not making a fuss, not included in the reunion, was Hank Bishop, who was just sitting in front of his locker signing the balls in a box that would have passed around the room eventually so everybody on the team could sign them. Brian knew that this box was on his way to the Children's Hospital of Michigan. Hank would look up occasionally and take the scene in, the way Brian was. Like he wasn't a part of it, the way Brian wasn't. When they first entered the clubhouse, Brian was at his dad's side, standing there, grinning as people came up to him. At one point, his dad had even said to Marty McBain, "You better be watching out for my kid," something his dad hadn't done himself in a long time. "He's a great kid," Marty said. "Best bat boy we've ever had. He knows the game, too. Must get that from his mother's side of the family." Then he and Marty began reminiscing about the time when their plane had been grounded by fog in San Francisco, and they had to hop a bus back to Los Angeles, and how one of the rookie infielders was in the bathroom at some dinner and got left behind. Almost without realizing he was doing it, Brian had moved away from the scene in the middle of the clubhouse, was standing near the door to Mr. S.'s office. He knew he had work to do. He just couldn't hang around all day. But even though it was as if he'd moved out of the picture, been cropped out of it, he couldn't make himself leave. At one point, he saw his dad go over, say something to Hank, shake his hand. Hank nodded, no expression on his face, looking at Cole Dudley the way he would at Brian or Finn. His dad reached into the side pocket of his jacket, pulled out what had been to be a business card, and handed it to Hank, looking more like a salesman in that moment than an ex-player. Rube Morgan finally came through the door in his uniform, gave his dad a hug, and said, I don't know what's in the water over there, or them California rolls, but you look older than me now. Rube, his dad said, only the earth is older than you, but you do look as if you could still give me a third of an inning. Oh, man, Cole said, don't I wish. Listen, Rube said, I wish I could catch up with you, but we just called up some 20-year-old kid from AAA, and I gotta see what kind of stuff he's got. You wanna come? Cole said, you don't have to ask me twice. Then Rube Morgan was telling him about the kids' minor league statistics, and two of them walked right past Brian, his dad not even seeing him, and out the clubhouse door. Brian watched them go, watched the door close behind him. Sayonara, Brian thought. He leaned against the wall outside Mr. Schenkel's office, feeling tired all of a sudden. Even though he hadn't done a stitch of work, he hadn't changed out of his regular clothes. There was a lot of less noise and a lot of less action in the clubhouse now that his dad was gone. Somebody turned up some music. Still, Brian didn't move. When he finally pushed off the wall, he felt himself sag a little, felt that catch in his throat you felt when you started to cry. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard, stopped what he was trying to come up out of him right there. He hadn't cried when Hank Bishop had started yelling at him on the street that day. He wasn't going to cry now because his dad had made him feel as if he were invisible. But he did need to get out of here, now. Brian took one last look across the room to the spot in the middle near the couches where his dad had been meeting and greeting before he left for the bullpen with Rube Morgan, and noticed Hank Bishop staring at him. Brian looked up in the stands at the top of the fifth inning and saw his dad sitting with the other scouts at the game, pointing at something in the outfield, smiling and saying something to the guy sitting to his left, both of them throwing back their heads and laughing. There was a pitching change going on, and Brian didn't have anything to do, so he looked over at section 130 for a long time, waiting for just one look back from his dad. Look at me, Brian thought, down here in a big league field in a big leaguer's uniform. But it was as if he wasn't here, the way he hadn't been in the clubhouse. It was as if he didn't matter to his dad, whether he was at commercial or on the other side of the world. He finally snapped out of it when he heard the home plate umpire yelling over him, saying, Batboy. Brian's head whipped around, but he saw the guy was grinning at him, hands on his hips, mask tipped back, saying, Earth to Brian. Sorry, Brian, I got no head for names. Could you go grab my bottle of water? He went and got the bottle of water where he kept it for the home plate umpires on the shelf in the dugout, and then went back to work, knowing exactly what he had to do. They said their goodbyes outside the clubhouse about 15 minutes after the Blue Jays had been beating the Tigers, and the media was already inside talking to the players. You sure you don't want me to wait and take you back, his dad said. No, I'm good, Brian said. I never know how long it will be to finish my work, and Finn's mom is coming anyway. I thought maybe you could go and grab a bite before I dropped you home. Dad, Brian said, ball players go out to eat after games, not bat boys. Well, I'm glad we got to go to another ball game together, Cole Dudley said, even though it was a little different than it used to be. It was great to see you, Dad. Yeah, you too. I'll check in once in a while, let you know how I'm doing, Brian said. I promise to do better with letters, his dad said, even thinking about buying myself a laptop lately, or finally, then we could email each other. Right. Well, take care of yourself, he said, and added, and your mom. She's pretty good at taking care of herself. Always was, Cole Dudley said. Always was. A couple of riders late coming down from the press box went past them. Brian and his dad stood there out of words before they were out of time. Natalie, stop. Next time I'll try to stay longer. That'd be great, Brian said. They looked at each other. Then his dad put up his hand for a high five, and Brian gave him one and walked quickly back toward the dugout, leaving his dad there, not looking back. Finn was collecting towels. Hey, Finn said. Hey, where you been? Just getting things straight with my dad, Brian said. Everything cool? Totally. Then he got busy, pulling bats out of their slots, not wanting to talk about a day with his dad that had ended up crushing him, even though he was sure his dad thought everything was fine. Brian realized now that it was too late for his dad to be somebody else, to be the dad Brian had been holding out hope he could be. He turned around and saw Finn looking at him and thought of something his mom liked to say, that sometimes guys had to talk about stuff whether they wanted to or not. As usual, he ignored that voice. He and Finn split up their chores the way they always did, Brian taking on most of the shoe-shining work tonight, Finn helping Mr. Schenkel get the laundry started since there was an afternoon game tomorrow. When they were finished, Brian took one last walk through in the dugout to make sure they hadn't missed anything. When he got back to the clubhouse, Mr. Schenkel was turning out the lights in his office, trying to make this an early one because tomorrow's an early day, he said. Lucky we got a fast game in tonight. I was thinking the same thing, Brian said. You and Finn good to go? Brian nodded. Mr. S said, you guys want to walk out with me? I left a couple of things on number 3, Brian said. It was nice seeing your dad, Mr. S said. He seemed pretty happy to be with the guys. Yeah, Brian said. He loved seeing the guys. Well, tell Finn goodnight for me, Mr. Schenkel said, but Finn was gone. Brian had told him he was going home with his dad the way he told his dad he was going home with Finn, and he called his mom and told her he was a total idiot. He forgot to tell her that with an afternoon game tomorrow, he and Finn were doing another sleepover at Commercial, but only he was. Okay, on your worksheet, you can do numbers 4, 5, and 6, and probably 7 too. 4, 5, 6, and 7. So 4 is, why was it as if Brian had been cropped out of the picture on page 149? So I'm on page 49. They were in the clubhouse when his dad was talking to all the players. It says, stop it. He knew he had work to do, but he couldn't just hang around all day. But even though it was as if he'd been moved out of the picture, been cropped out of it, he couldn't make himself leave. Number 5, why did Brian feel tired all of a sudden on page 150?
What?
He says he leaned against the wall outside Mr. Schenkel's office, feeling tired all of a sudden, even though he hadn't done a stitch of work yet, hadn't even changed out of his regular clothes. Why do you think Hank Bishop was thinking? What do you think Hank was thinking when he watched Brian on page 151? And why did Brian sleep over at Commercial? Okay, one more chapter, and it's a short one. He hadn't wanted to take the ride home with his dad because he didn't want to talk to him anymore. He didn't want to hear his dad say what he tried to say outside the clubhouse, how things were going to be different from now on. Better. Brian knew better than that. Things were never going to change between them, never going to get better, whether his dad was there or not in a million years. And he knew something else. He didn't want to come home and have his mom be waiting up for him, as she'd said she was going to be, and had to talk about his dad. But he just wanted to be alone. Brian wanted him to be at the ballpark to make him feel the way he did the first time he slept over. Maybe he wanted to make him the way it always had made his dad feel, like it was all he needed, like it was the only place in the world he really wanted to be. He waited a few minutes until he was sure it was safe to go back to the clubhouse, walked up the hallway and up the steps and through the door, found the blanket and pillows where he knew Mr. Schenkel left them in one of the closets, and laid them neatly on the couch he used the first night. If anybody came and found him from security or from the grounds crew who hung out around late, he would just say that his mom was late, that she was coming, and that he was just waiting inside. He stayed inside the clubhouse a long time, not turning on the television, just sitting there, feeling like he wanted to pull the whole place over him. Finally, he looked up at the clock, almost 2 a.m. now. He still didn't feel like sleeping. He felt tired all day, exhausted sometimes, yet now he couldn't sleep. So he walked down to the dugout and then up to the field, took a few steps up on the field in the way that they had the first time. But tonight, he didn't want to go and stand on home plate or run around the bases. Instead, he stood on the dugout steps and turned around and looked up to the stands, and for the first time, he could no longer imagine himself and his dad sitting there together. Tonight, he had no desire, none, to go up and sit with his own memories in section 135. Instead, Brian looked to his left to section 130. The seats in 130 were all he could see and all he cared about. He just saw his dad in there with the other scouts, looking as happy as if he were at his own birthday party. It was why the ballpark didn't make things better for Brian tonight, why baseball couldn't make things better or fix things with his dad. He wasn't sure anything could. He found out something tonight. It didn't matter to his dad, who was sitting with him at a ball game, and no matter how much Brian loved baseball, it was never going to make his father love him more. So number 8, what did Brian realize at the end of chapter 20? I would love for you if you could write your answers in, take a picture of this, and then insert it into the Google Classroom document that I shared with you all. If you have any questions, just bring this paper with you to the online Zoom chat and we can go over them later. All right, bye.